I woke up to chainsaws, not the distant hum of construction. These were right outside my bedroom window. I stumbled onto my porch in pajamas and watched 4 men destroying the oak trees my late wife had loved. Trees that had shaded our home for 40 years. The woman pointing and directing them from her white Escalade. Constance Peaton, my HOA president. She was smiling. Here. Quote S. What she didn't know. Those trees weren't just on my property. Cutting them down was about to cost her everything she owned. Because that simple mistake triggered an investigation that uncovered 3 years of fraud, embezzlement, and the biggest property scam I'd ever seen. What would you do if your HOA destroyed $50,000 worth of trees just to improve someone else's view? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Because I turned her illegal chainsaw party into a $1.4 million judgment that put me in control of her entire subdivision. 3 years ago, I thought I'd found paradise. Garrett Blackwood, 52. Newly, retired electrical engineer. And I just bought my dream retirement home in Millbrook Estates, Ohio. Corner lot, 1.2 acres with 6 massive oak trees that had been growing since the 80s. My wife Sarah had died from cancer 6 months earlier. And these trees, God. They were exactly what I needed. This perfect green canopy where I could drink my morning coffee and remember her laugh echoing through the branches. She, quote, loved trees. Always said they were proof that beautiful things could grow stronger after weathering. Storms. The realtor who sold me the house was Constance Peaton, blonde, 48, with that aggressive suburban charm that screams, I run this place. She drove a white Escalade with Blessed on the license plate frame and mentioned casually that she was also the HOA president. Just a formality, she assured me. We barely have any rules here. That should have been red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 came during my first HOA meeting. Constance ran it like a corporate board meeting, complete with PowerPoint slides about property value optimization and community aesthetic standards. I watched her shut down a 70-year-old veteran who wanted to install a memorial garden for his deceased son. Not in keeping with our vision, she declared, gavel, banging like a judge. But the real red flag, the way she kept glancing at my trees through the community center windows, her eyes calculating something I couldn't quite figure out. The first friendly visit came 6 weeks later. Constance knocked on my door wearing tennis whites that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, clipboard in hand, perfume so heavy I could taste it in the back of my throat. Garrett, honey, we need to talk about your trees, she said, her heels clicking against my porch like a metronome counting down to trouble. Several lakefront neighbors have expressed concerns about their views being compromised. I looked past her, toward the artificial lake. 3 massive houses sat on the far shore, each worth probably $800,000, each with perfect sight lines to the water. If my oak trees weren't in the way. The trees were here when I bought the place. I said. From you, if I remember correctly. Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. Oh, absolutely. But you know how these things evolve. Property values, community standards. I quote, am sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. That was my introduction to Constance Speak, where everyone meant Constance and solution meant you lose. Over the next 18 months, she escalated like a textbook bully. First came the suggestions during her evening power walks, always stopping at my property line to comment on overgrowth and maintenance issues. Then formal violation notices for grass height, mailbox positioning, even the color of my welcome mat. Each violation carried $50 daily fines. Each appeal required appearing before her hand-picked board of nervous retirees who wouldn't make eye contact when they voted against me. The message was clear. Comply or pay. But Here's what Constance didn't know about electrical engineers. We quote re-problem solvers and we keep detailed records. While she was busy playing neighborhood dictator, I was researching property law, pulling original subdivision documents, and documenting every interaction. Those late evenings under my threatened trees, laptop balanced on my knees, weren't just about defending my oaks. They were about understanding exactly how much power Constance actually had. The answer surprised me. Less than she thought. The breaking point came when she hired a fake arborist to declare my healthy 40-year-old trees imminently dangerous. That quote when I discovered her first major mistake. The guy wasn't certified for safety assessments. His report was worthless. But as I dug deeper into Constance's background, I uncovered something much bigger than tree fraud. Something that would turn her from predator to prey and transform my quiet retirement into the most expensive lesson she'd ever received. Because those lakefront neighbors she was so eager to please. They were about to discover their HOA president had been lying to them about a lot more than just my trees. Constance quote, revenge came swift and theatrical. 2 weeks after her fake arborist scheme collapsed, she appeared at my door, clutching a manila folder thick as a phone book, wearing that predatory smile I'd learned to dread. Garrett, honey. I have wonderful news, she purred, her perfume so heavy it made my eyes water. The newly formed Millbrook Estates Emergency Safety Committee has completed a thorough review of your dangerous trees. I quote, "Dee never heard of this committee. Naturally. Emergency Safety Committee. Oh, yes. Very official. Mrs. Henderson, the Johnsons, and myself. We quote, we determined your trees pose an imminent threat. She thrust the folder at me like she was serving a warrant. Inside were photos of my oaks during February's ice storm. Branches drooping, under frozen weight shot, from menacing angles that made 40-year-old healthy trees look like widowmakers. The report demanded immediate removal to prevent catastrophic damage and potential loss of life. The audacity was breathtaking, but Constance had made one crucial mistake. Back in my engineering days, I'd worked with enough contractors to know that emergency tree assessments require certified arborists, real ones. While she stood there radiating smugness, I was already planning my counterattack. That evening, I pulled up the state licensing database, something I'd learned to navigate during my divorce years ago, when Sarah's oncologist turned out to have credential issues. Constance, quote, expert arborist, license suspended 3 months ago for falsifying safety reports. The state board had a thick file documenting his pattern of fraudulent assessments. Better yet, I remember reading about Ohio's recording laws during a workplace harassment case at my old company, one-party consent state. Every conversation I'd recorded with Constance admitting her real motivation, those lakefront views, was perfectly legal. Evidence. The next morning, I called City Inspector Rodriguez directly. When he arrived, a weathered guy who clearly knew the difference between healthy trees and hazards, I handed him the arborist's licensing violations and played selected recordings. Rodriguez walked my property with a GPS unit, measuring distances and checking soil conditions, the crunch of fallen leaves under his boots mixed with his muttered Spanish. Curses he realized he'd been dragged into an HOA fraud scheme. Mr. Blackwood, he finally said, looking genuinely angry. These are specimen trees in excellent health. Someone, quote, wasted city resources with false reports. Could you document that officially? He was already writing. Complaint dismissed with prejudice, and tell your HOA president that filing another fraudulent emergency report could result in criminal charges. Now came the part Constance wasn't expecting. I went nuclear. Filed detailed complaints with the state licensing board, the city inspector's office, and the county prosecutor. But the real game changer came when I decided to verify something that had been nagging at me. Exactly where my property lines were located. The Original 1987 subdivision plat told a fascinating story. My corner lot extended 15 feet further lakeward than current survey stakes indicated. Someone had systematically moved boundary markers, probably during landscaping projects over the years. Property that legally belonged to me was being used by neighbors for decorative gardens and dock access. I quote, D stumbled across this principle during my father's estate settlement. Original subdivision. Documents always trump later surveys, and homeowners often discover they own more land than they realize. Your deed description is gospel, even when physical markers lie. When I confronted Mrs. Henderson with this evidence, her face went white. Garrett, I need to confess something, she whispered, glancing around nervously. Constance told us you were planning to remove those trees anyway, for insurance money. She said if we didn't sign her petition, declining property values would hurt our retirement savings. Interesting story. There, quote, S. more. She, quote, S. Done this before. Remember the Williams on Elm Street? Constance forced them to remove a healthy maple that blocked someone's lake view. They sold their house rather than keep fighting her. That night, I sat under my threatened oaks with a legal pad, listening to the gentle lap of lake water against what I now suspected were illegally placed docks. The pieces were forming a pattern. Constance wasn't just targeting trees. She was running a systematic property manipulation scheme. But the biggest shock came when I decided to research the most obvious question. If Constance was so concerned about property boundaries and sight lines, maybe I should examine exactly where her own lakefront mansion was situated. The records I found 3 days later made my hands shake with excitement. Constance, quote, S beautiful lakefront property, the one she was so desperate to give better views, had a serious legal problem. According to the original developer bankruptcy filings, her entire lot was supposed to be community green space. Constance Peaton might not actually own the land her house was built on. Constance struck back like a cornered animal. The morning after my property line victory, I woke to find 5 violation notices rubber-banded to my front door, each one more ridiculous than the last. Grass height, 0.3 and above community standards. Mailbox color, unauthorized charcoal black instead of regulation navy. Christmas decorations displayed 14 days past acceptable holiday period. Welcome matte, non-compliant earth tone rather than neutral beige. Even my garden hose was cited for being visibly stored rather than properly concealed. Each violation carried $50 daily fines. Do the math. That quote S, $250 bleeding from my bank account every single day until I achieved compliance. The payment notice gave me 30 days before they'd file a lien against my property. Standing on my porch reading this bureaucratic assault, I could smell the honeysuckle blooming in Sarah's memorial garden. The sweet fragrance mixed with my growing rageas. I realized Constance was trying to financially bleed me into submission. But she'd just made a critical error. She, quote, D, given me a paper trail. That afternoon, I marched into the county courthouse and requested every corporate filing for Millbrook Estates, HOA. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with ink-stained fingers, handed me a thin folder that should have been thick with annual reports and compliance documents. What I found made my heart race with excitement. Millbrook Estates HOA had let their Ohio nonprofit corporation status expire 18 months ago. They, quote, dismissed the annual renewal deadline and never bothered to refile. According to state law, something I'd learned during a messy consulting contract years ago. Expired corporations lose all legal authority to collect fees, impose penalties, or enforce contracts. Constance had been running an illegal shakedown operation for over a year. But it got better. The HOA's checking account wasn't registered to the Homeowners Association at all. Every dues payment for 24 months had been deposited directly into Peaton Properties LLC, Constance's real estate business. $250,000 in community funds flowing into her personal company account. I quote, D stumbled onto systematic embezzlement. The Ohio Attorney General's fraud hotline answered on the second ring. The investigator who took my call practically salivated when I explained the expired corporate status and diverted funds. Mr. Blackwood, you're alleging theft of over $200,000 in homeowner dues. That's just the beginning, I said, flipping through bank records I'd subpoenaed through a public information request. She, quote, "s been using our money to pay for fraudulent expert reports and fake violation enforcement. While preparing my evidence package, I decided to research Constance's history. What I discovered made my hands shake with anger. She, quote, pulled identical scams in 2 previous neighborhoods. 3 families bankrupted by escalating HOA fines, forced to sell their homes at below-market prices. Every sale handled by Peaton Properties. She was running a property theft ring disguised as community governance. The smoking gun came from her own Facebook posts. Constance had documented her entire operation online, bragging about helping neighbors achieve better property values by removing unsightly obstacles. Photos of beautiful mature trees being cut down. Captions celebrating improved sightlines and community aesthetics. She, quote, literally confessed to conspiracy on social media. I called an emergency meeting with the 3 rational board members, the ones who'd refused to rubber stamp her tree removal vote. We gathered in Henderson's living room, where the aroma of fresh coffee couldn't mask the tension crackling between us. When I spread out the evidence, expired corporation papers, bank statements showing embezzlement, documented patterns of forced sales. Their faces went through identical cycles of shock, disbelief, and fury. She's been stealing from us for 2 years. Johnson's voice cracked with rage. Worse, she's been using our own money to manufacture fake emergencies and fraudulent violations. Every fine she's collected has been illegal. Henderson stood abruptly, walking to her window, where she could see Constance's mansion gleaming in the afternoon sun. No wonder she insisted on handling all the financial administration when she became president. We thought she was being generous with her time. She was being generous with our money. 2 nights later, Constance played her final card. She called another emergency board meeting, bringing her husband, City Councilman Richard Peaton, as muscle. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as neighbors filed in, sensing something big was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Constance announced, her voice echoing with false authority. Mr. Blackwood's continued, "Defiance threatens our entire community's property values. I'm calling for an immediate vote to authorize emergency tree removal and expedited lien proceedings." That's when I stood up with my evidence folder, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. "Before any votes," I said, my voice carrying clearly, "in the sudden silence, this community needs to know that our HOA has been operating illegally for 18 months. Every fine collected, every penalty imposed, every threat made, all of it criminal fraud. The room exploded into chaos. But Constance wasn't done fighting. In fact, she was about to make the mistake that would destroy her completely. What happened next still gives me chills. Constance sat frozen for exactly 3 seconds after my bombshell revelation, her mind clearly racing through damage control scenarios. Then she did something I'll never forget. She smiled. Not the fake HOA president smile, a cold, calculating expression that told me she'd been planning for this moment. "Well," she said, standing slowly and smoothing her designer blazer, "it seems Mr. Blackwood has done his homework, but research can't protect you from legitimate safety concerns." She pulled out her phone and made a call right there in front of everyone. "Yes, this is Constance Peaton. We have that tree emergency. We discussed. Yes, first thing tomorrow morning. No, the property owner will be traveling. My blood turned to ice. She, quote, D. Been monitoring my social media. Dot. My daughter. Emma was graduating college this weekend, and I'd posted about the drive to Cleveland. Constance knew I'd be gone for exactly 8 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice dripping with false concern. Emergency tree removal will commence tomorrow at 7 a.m. We have a legitimate safety crisis that supersedes any administrative irregularities, Mr. Blackwood has raised. The meeting erupted in chaos. Henderson stood up shouting about illegal corporations. Johnson demanded to see permits, but Constance was already walking out with her husband, phone pressed to her ear, making more calls. I followed them to the parking lot where the sodium streetlights cast everything in sickly yellow. The smell of rain hung heavy in the summer air. Constance, you can't authorize tree removal on my property. You have no legal authority. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw the real woman behind the suburban mask. Her eyes were cold as winter lake water. Watch me, she said, climbing into her Escalade. I barely slept that night. At 5 a.m., I called in sick to Emma's graduation, the first time I'd ever missed one of my kids' milestones, and positioned myself at my bedroom window with a camera. At 6:47 a.m., the convoy arrived. 2 pickup trucks, a wood chipper, and a county sheriff's cruiser. Hard hats, safety gear, the works. But something felt wrong about the whole setup. I threw on clothes and ran outside as chainsaws roared to life. Stop. These are my trees on my property. The crew foreman, a weathered guy with tobacco-stained teeth, looked confused. Quote, Am said this was emergency removal. Got the paperwork right here. He handed me a work order signed by Constance Peaton, Emergency Safety Coordinator, Millbrook Estates. The letter had looked official, but I recognized it from the expired corporate documents. Legally meaningless. This woman has no authority to authorize anything. She quote S not even operating a legal HOA. That quote S when Sheriff Deputy Martinez stepped forward. A stocky guy with nervous eyes who kept glancing toward Constance's house like he was waiting for instructions. Sir, I'm here to supervise a legitimate safety operation. The city inspector signed off on this emergency removal. What city inspector? Martinez fumbled with his paperwork, clearly uncomfortable. Inspector Rodriguez signed the emergency authorization yesterday, but I'd spoken to Rodriguez 2 weeks ago. He, quote, D specifically told me these trees were healthy specimens and any emergency claims would be fraudulent. Someone was lying, and I had a recording to prove it. While I argued with the deputy, the chainsaws started. The sound of steel biting into 40-year-old oak filled the morning air, mixing with the diesel exhaust from the chipper and my own panicked breathing. They cut down 6 trees in 27 minutes. 6 magnificent oaks that had shaded my home since the 1980s, including the one with Sarah's carved initials. The memorial tree, where I'd proposed to my wife, where she'd told me about her cancer diagnosis, where I'd scattered some of her ashes after the funeral. Gone. Reduced to wood chips and sawdust scattered across my torn-up yard. But here's the twist that changed everything. They didn't stop at the property line. In their rush to complete the job before I could get an injunction, the crew cut down trees 15 feet inside my confirmed boundary. Trees that were unquestionably, legally, absolutely on my land. Deputy Martinez realized his mistake the moment I pointed to the survey stakes. His face went white as he understood he just supervised criminal destruction of private property. Jesus Christ, he muttered, pulling out his radio. We may have a problem here. The tree crew foreman looked sick. Ma'am said everything on this side of the driveway didn't mention no property lines. I stood in the devastation, sawdust thick in the air, looking at $89,000 worth of mature trees. Reduced to stumps. The sweet smell of fresh-cut oak mixed with diesel fumes and the acrid scent of my burning rage. But through my grief and fury, One thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Constance had just committed multiple felonies in front of witnesses. Criminal trespass, destruction of property, fraud, conspiracy, enough charges to destroy her completely. She, quote, wanted to cut down my trees to improve her view. Instead, she'd just handed me the evidence to take everything she owned, including, as I was about to discover, property that wasn't legally hers to begin with. The devastation was complete by 8:30 a.m. 6 mature oaks reduced to stumps, my yard looking like a war zone, and Deputy Martinez frantically trying to figure out how to explain criminal property destruction. In his incident report, I was photographing the carnage when my attorney called back. Marcus Bennett specialized in property rights cases, and his voice carried that particular excitement lawyers get when they smell blood in the water. Garrett, you're not going to believe what I found in the subdivision records. Are you sitting down? I looked around at the sawdust covering everything I own. Trust me, Marcus, after this morning, nothing can shock me. Constance, quote, lakefront property was never supposed to be privately owned. According to the original 1987 development plan, her entire lot, house, dock, everything, sits on dedicated community green space. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? The original developer, Millbrook Construction, went bankrupt in 1989 before filing final subdivision amendments. Constance, quote, deed is based on preliminary plats that were never legally recorded. Her property should belong to the homeowners association. Sat down hard on my porch steps, my head spinning. How is that possible? She's been living there for 6 years. Gets better. I found bankruptcy court records showing Constance knew about the problem when she bought the place. She paid the developer's attorney $15,000 to bury the conflicting documents and process a fraudulent deed transfer. The pieces suddenly clicked together with horrible clarity. That, quote, is why she's been so aggressive about controlling the HOA. She, quote, has been using her position to prevent anyone from questioning land use or reviewing original development documents. Exactly. And here's the kicker. Her real estate license requires disclosure of any known title, defects. She, quote, has been selling homes in a neighborhood where she's illegally occupying community property. The state licensing board will crucify her. I stood up slowly, looking across the destroyed landscape toward Constance's gleaming mansion on what I now knew was stolen land. The morning sun reflected off her lakefront windows like a beacon pointing toward justice. Marcus, what's that property worth? Conservative estimate, $850, 000. The lakefront alone is worth $600,000 in today's market. My destroyed trees suddenly seemed like small potatoes. So when I sue for tree damages, we're not just suing for trees anymore. Garrett. We, quote, re-demanding reversion of illegally privatized community property. This case just went from small claims to federal court. I thought about all the neighbors Constance had bullied over the years, all the property modifications she demanded, all the families she'd driven away with her harassment campaigns. She hadn't been protecting property values. She, quote, been protecting her own illegal occupation of community land. There, quote, more, Marcus continued. I found records showing she's used HOA funds to maintain her illegal property, landscaping, dock repairs, even her lake access driveway. All paid for with community money. We, quote, re-talking about a systematic conspiracy to defraud an entire neighborhood. The sweet smell of fresh sawdust mixed with the distant aroma of lake water that Constance had been enjoying illegally for 6 years. Every sunset she'd watched from her stolen dock. Every dinner party on her fraudulent deck. Every time she'd collected HOA dues while living on community property, all of it built on lies. What, quote, our next move? We file everything simultaneously. Tree damages, property reversion, criminal referrals, and state licensing complaints. By the time we're done, Constance won't just lose her house, she'll lose everything. I looked at the destruction around me with new eyes. Those trees had been my memorial to Sarah, but their loss was about to become Constance's complete undoing. She, gambled everything on one illegal chainsaw party, and she was about to discover that some bets destroy the person making them. Marcus, how long do you think she's known this day would come? Based on her recent behavior, I think she's been planning her escape route for months, but it's too late now. She just committed multiple felonies to cover up a civil fraud. There, nowhere left to run. Within 48 hours of the tree massacre, my quiet retirement home had transformed into a war room. Marcus Bennett arrived that Tuesday morning with 2 associates, a forensic accountant, and enough legal documents to wallpaper my living room. "Garrett, we're not just building a case anymore," Marcus said, spreading color-coded files across my dining table. "We're dismantling a criminal enterprise that's been operating for 6 years." The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Rodriguez, had spent the weekend dissecting HOA financial records. Her findings made my head spin. Your neighbor has diverted $347,000 in community funds through her private business accounts, Lisa announced, pointing to a spreadsheet that looked like a prosecutor's dream. Landscaping contracts paid to companies she owns, maintenance services that were never performed, and my personal favorite, $23,000 in emergency legal fees that went directly to her divorce attorney. Marcus added a second team member, environmental lawyer Janet Morrison, who specialized in tree law. Yes, that's apparently a real thing. And after seeing Janet's preliminary damage assessment, I understood why. 6 mature white oaks with 40-year growth patterns, Janet explained, showing me photographs that made the trees look like botanical treasures. Replacement value using industry standard calculations, $89,000. But that's just the beginning. She pulled out soil analysis reports that read like environmental crime scene evidence. Removing established root systems has destabilized your slope drainage. We quote relooking at potential erosion damage, foundation issues for neighboring properties, and ecosystem disruption that'll take decades to restore. The third attorney specialized in RICO cases, something I'd only heard about in mob movies. Apparently, Constance's systematic fraud qualified as organized criminal activity under federal racketeering laws. Pattern of behavior, spanning multiple victims, financial fraud exceeding federal thresholds, conspiracy involving public officials. He rattled off like a prosecutor's checklist. Your HOA president isn't just a neighborhood bully. She, essay running a property theft syndicate. While the legal team built our case, I was handling community organization. Word about Constance's illegal tree cutting had spread through Millbrook Estates like wildfire, and my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Henderson called first. Garrett, I've been going through my HOA files. Constance overcharged us $8,000 for community center repairs that were never completed. Johnson was next. She made me remove a garden shed that was supposedly non-compliant, then had her landscaping company install an identical shed at her house using HOA funds. By Thursday, 7 families had documented similar harassment campaigns. Each story followed the same pattern. Manufactured violations, escalating fines, threats of liens, and forced compliance that always seemed to benefit Constance or her allies. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. Carol Martinez, Deputy Martinez's wife, called me Friday evening, her voice shaking with anger. Mr. Blackwood, my husband, came home sick to his stomach after that tree cutting. Constance told him the emergency authorization came from the city, but when he checked with his supervisor, there was no record of any legitimate order. Your husband was lied to. Worse. She offered him $500 cash to supervise the removal without asking too many questions. He thought it was legitimate overtime pay until he realized what really happened. That conversation gave us our final piece. Evidence of bribing a law enforcement officer. Marcus spent the weekend coordinating our multi-pronged attack. Criminal referrals would go to the county prosecutor and state attorney general. Simultaneously, civil lawsuits would be filed in both state and federal court. Professional licensing complaints would target both Constance's real estate license and her husband's position on city council. The key is timing, Marcus explained, showing me a timeline that looked like a military operation. We file everything at once: criminal, civil, and administrative complaints. She won't have time to hide assets or manufacture counter-evidence. But the most satisfying part of our strategy involved the community itself. Ohio law allows homeowner associations to reclaim illegally privatized common areas through majority vote. And we now had documentation proving Constance's lakefront property belonged to the community. Imagine the irony, Marcus said with a grin that could have powered the neighborhood streetlights. She destroyed your trees to improve her lake view, and we're going to use that crime to take away her lake entirely. The final piece fell into place when Janet Morrison's environmental assessment revealed something extraordinary. The area where my memorial trees had stood was designated as protected wetland buffer in the original development plan. Removing those trees wasn't just property destruction. It was environmental crime that triggered federal jurisdiction. Constance thought she was solving a sightline problem, Janet explained, reviewing EPA regulations that could add another $200,000 in penalties. Instead, she just violated the Clean Water Act on federal property. By Sunday evening, we had everything. Criminal evidence, civil damages totaling $1.40 million, and documentation proving the biggest property fraud in county history. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the satisfaction of approaching justice. As I reviewed our battle plan one final time, Constance had spent 3 years bullying an entire neighborhood. She was about to discover what happened when the neighborhood finally fought back with professional help and unlimited determination. Constance's desperation became visible the moment our legal filings hit the court system. Monday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as a moving truck pulled up to her lakefront mansion. By noon, a for sale sign appeared on her front lawn, the same premium lakefront property she'd been illegally occupying for 6 years. She was trying to liquidate everything before the courts could freeze her assets, but Marcus had anticipated this move. By 2 p.m., we had an emergency restraining order, preventing any property transfers pending our fraud investigation. The look on Constance's face when the sheriff served those papers was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. That evening, she made her first major miscalculation. Instead of laying low, she went on the offensive with a social media campaign that would have made a politician proud. I quote, "Am being targeted by a vindictive neighbor who can't accept community standards," she posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, complete with carefully cropped photos of my unkempt yard. Mr. Blackwood has filed frivolous lawsuits to avoid paying legitimate HOA fines. The post backfired spectacularly. Within hours, neighbors began sharing their own Constance horror stories. The Hendersons documented $3,000 in bogus fines. The Johnsons posted photos of landscaping work they'd paid for twice. Once through HOA dues, again when Constance claimed the original work was inadequate. By Wednesday, 17 families had joined our class action lawsuit, but Constance's next move crossed into criminal territory. She attempted to bribe city inspector Rodriguez, offering him $2,000 to backdate an emergency tree removal authorization. Rodriguez, still furious about being dragged into her fraud scheme, was wearing a wire. The recording was devastating. Constance, quote, "S voice clear as a church bell, offering cash payment for falsified government documents." Marcus played it for me over coffee that tasted like victory. "I need you to sign this emergency authorization and predate it to last Friday." Her recorded voice said 2,000 cash, and we can both pretend this paperwork got lost in bureaucratic shuffle. Rodriguez, quote, "S response was perfect." May, quote, "AM, comma." You're asking me to commit a felony. I'm asking you to be reasonable about a simple administrative oversight. The FBI Fraud Division loved that recording. Attempting to corrupt a government official elevated her charges from state misdemeanors to federal felonies carrying serious prison time. Meanwhile, I was fighting a different battle. Constance had convinced 3 neighbors to sign affidavits, claiming my trees had actually been dangerous, that she'd acted heroically to protect community safety. The affidavits were obviously coached, identical. Language, same suspicious details, but I'd learned something valuable during my military service. Always verify your intelligence sources. A little research revealed that all 3 affidavit signers had received emergency property tax assessment reductions processed through her husband's city council connections. Each family had saved thousands in taxes right before signing statements supporting Constance. That discovery gave us evidence of conspiracy and official misconduct involving a sitting city councilman. Thursday brought Constance's most desperate gambit yet. She filed a counter-lawsuit claiming I'd been harassing her family, threatening her safety, and engaging in a malicious campaign of character assassination. The filing demanded $500,000 in damages for emotional distress and defamation. Her mistake was including specific dates and incidents that I could disprove with time-stamped evidence. She claimed I'd made threatening phone calls on days when my cell phone records showed I was visiting my daughter in Cleveland. She alleged property vandalism during periods when my home security cameras proved I never left the house. Marcus actually laughed while reading her countersuit. Garrett, she just handed us evidence of perjury. Filing false claims in federal court is another felony charge. The community response was overwhelming. Neighbors organized meal trains for my family. Volunteer crews to help replant my destroyed landscape, and a legal defense fund that raised $12,000 in 3 days. But the most powerful support came from an unexpected source. Carol Martinez, the deputy's wife, organized a petition demanding Constance's immediate removal from the HOA board. Within 48 hours, she'd collected signatures from 41 of 47 neighborhood families. We, quote, "retired of living under a dictatorship," Carol announced at an impromptu neighborhood meeting held in the community center. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. She read names of families who'd been bullied, fined, and terrorized by Constance's regime. Henderson stood up, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "She's stolen our money, destroyed our neighbors' property, and turned our community into a war zone. Enough is enough." By Friday evening, the walls were closing in from every direction. Federal fraud investigators had frozen Constance's bank accounts. The state licensing board had suspended her real estate credentials pending criminal charges. Her husband faced ethics violations that would end his political career. But Constance wasn't finished. Saturday morning brought her final desperate attempt to maintain control and the mistake that would destroy her completely. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Sunday afternoon, claiming urgent community business required immediate attention. The agenda promised final resolution of ongoing disputes and important financial decisions. I knew she was planning something catastrophic. I just didn't realize she was about to confess to everything in front of 50 witnesses in a live Facebook stream. Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Constance's emergency meeting felt like a trap, but I couldn't figure out the angle. At 3 a.m. I was pacing my kitchen when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She, quote, planning to dissolve the HOA tomorrow and claim bankruptcy protection. Thought you should know. A friend. My blood ran cold. If Constance could legally dissolve the homeowners association, she might escape liability for the embezzled funds and fraudulent activities. Worse, dissolving the HOA could complicate our property reversion claims since there'd be no legal entity to receive the stolen land. I called Marcus immediately. Despite the ungodly hour. She can't unilaterally dissolve an HOA, he said, his voice groggy but alert. Requires majority homeowner vote and state approval, but she might try to ram it through if she's desperate enough. What if she succeeds? Then we're fighting a much more complicated battle. We need to be there tomorrow with our own agenda. Sunday morning brought an unexpected ally. Deputy Martinez appeared at my door, looking like he hadn't slept either, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes haunted. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to tell you something before that meeting today. My wife says I should have spoken up sooner, but he took a shaky breath. Constance offered me money to look the other way during that tree cutting. I thought it was legitimate overtime pay for supervising a safety operation. You took the money?" "No, sir. But I didn't ask enough questions either. I let her manipulate me into enabling what I now know was a crime. He handed me an envelope. This is my official statement for your attorneys. Every detail of what she told me, what she promised, and how she made that whole operation seem legal." The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the community center, but by 1:30, cars were parked 3 blocks away. Word had spread beyond Millbrook Estates. Local news had picked up the story of HOA corruption, and I spotted at least 2 reporters setting up cameras outside. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Constance sat at the head table wearing a black business suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which, in a way, she was. Her husband, Richard, flanked her left side, sweating despite the air conditioning. 3 nervous board members completed the panel, but the real shock was seeing FBI agent Sarah Bennett sitting in the back row taking notes in a government-issued notebook. Federal investigators don't attend HOA meetings unless they're building a criminal case. Constance called the meeting to order with a gavel that shook in her hands. Ladies and gentlemen, recent events have made it clear that continuing our homeowners association is no longer viable. I quote, "am calling for an immediate vote to dissolve Millbrook Estates HOA and distribute remaining assets to current homeowners." Our case became required reading in law schools studying HOA fraud, and the Ohio legislature passed the Millbrook Act, new regulations requiring independent financial audits and criminal background checks for HOA board members. 3 other communities used our legal precedent to reclaim illegally privatized common areas, recovering over $2 million in stolen community assets. But the most satisfying outcome was personal. My retirement, which had been destroyed by Constance's harassment campaign, transformed into something meaningful I never expected. The Millbrook Property Rights Education Foundation, established with part of my settlement money, provides free legal consultation for homeowners facing HOA abuse. We've helped 17 families fight fraudulent violations and recovered over $300,000 in illegal fees. Last month, we hosted our first annual tree festival, celebrating both environmental stewardship and community solidarity. Local families brought picnic blankets to spread under the shade of our memorial grove, while children climbed on playground equipment built where Constance's Escalade used to intimidate neighbors. The smell of grilled burgers mixed with the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle blooming along our restored lakefront. Henderson, now our democratically elected HOA president, gave a speech about the power of neighbors standing together against corruption. Johnson, our treasurer, presented financial reports that showed transparent accounting and community-controlled spending for the first time in years. Even Deputy Martinez, who testified against Constance at her sentencing hearing, joined us with his family for the celebration. The festival's highlight was our scholarship presentation to Emma Rodriguez, a local high school student planning to study property law at Ohio State. Her essay about using legal knowledge to protect community rights earned her $5,000 toward college expenses and a summer internship with Marcus Bennett's law firm. As the sun set over our reclaimed lake, painting the water gold and crimson, I thought about Sarah and how proud she would have been of what grew from our tragedy. Her carved initials in that first memorial oak had been destroyed by Constance's chainsaws. But her legacy lived on in every family gathering on community land. Every child learning to swim in water that belonged to everyone. Every neighbor who felt safe and respected in their own home. The evening ended with s'mores around a fire pit built on the exact spot where Constance used to park her intimidating Escalade. Children's laughter echoed across the lake, while parents shared stories about the old days when one person's greed had poisoned an entire community. But those days were gone forever. We quote, "Dee learned that individual property rights protect everyone when defended together. That documented truth defeats manufactured authority every time. And that communities have more power than they realize when they choose courage over compliance. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment and share your worst HOA nightmare. You might be surprised how many legal options you actually have. And hit subscribe if you want more stories about regular people beating corrupt systems through smart legal strategies and community organizing. Next week, I'm telling you about the homeowner who discovered his neighbor's perfect lawn was hiding, a massive environmental crime, and how he turned a noise complaint into a $2.3 million EPA settlement that changed federal regulations. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you. The room erupted. Henderson stood up, shouting about stolen funds. Johnson demanded an accounting of missing money. But Constance pressed forward with parliamentary procedure, trying to force a vote before anyone could object properly. That quote when I realized her real strategy. She wasn't trying to escape liability. She was trying to destroy evidence. Dissolving the HOA would eliminate the legal entity that owned records of her embezzlement, making prosecution much more difficult. I stood up with my folder of evidence, feeling 47 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Before any dissolution vote, this community deserves to know exactly what they're dissolving. Mr. Blackwood, you're out of order. Constance snapped, her composure finally cracking. Actually, I'm perfectly in order. As a homeowner in good standing, I have the right to present relevant information before any major vote. Agent Bennett looked up from her notepad with obvious interest. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, our HOA president has embezzled $347,000 in community funds, bribed government officials, and illegally occupied community property worth over $800. She quote, not dissolving this association to benefit homeowners. She quote, trying to destroy evidence of federal crimes. Constance shot to her feet, her face flushed with rage. That quote slander. I quote devoted years of my life to this community. Then explain why your lakefront property sits on land that was supposed to remain community green space. The room went dead silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of Agent Bennett's pen scratching across paper. That quote, that's a misunderstanding of the original development plans. Constance stammered. It quote, a misunderstanding that's made you $850,000 richer while stealing from your neighbors. Her husband, Richard, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. This meeting is over. We quote relieving. But Constance wasn't done. In her fury and desperation, she made the fatal mistake I'd been hoping for. You people don't understand what I've done for this neighborhood. She screamed, her carefully maintained facade finally shattering. I quote improved property values, removed problem residents, and maintained standards that benefit everyone. If that required creative financing and strategic property management, then so be it. Agent Bennett stopped writing and looked up with the expression of someone who'd just heard a full confession. The room erupted in chaos as Constance realized what she'd just admitted in front of 50 witnesses. 2 reporters and a federal investigator. Her downfall had finally begun. The community center had never seen anything like it. By 2:15 p.m. Standing room only didn't begin to describe the crowd. Neighbors who'd been feuding for years sat shoulder to shoulder. United by their shared fury at Constance's systematic abuse. Local news crews positioned cameras along the walls, while Agent Bennett sat front and center, her federal badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Constance entered through the side door like a defendant walking into court, flanked by a sweating attorney who clearly hadn't had time to read the case files. Her usual commanding presence had evaporated, replaced by the hunted look of someone who knows the walls are closing. This emergency meeting will address ongoing legal harassment and frivolous accusations, she announced, her voice cracking slightly as she tried to maintain control. But the room's energy was already against her. 7 neighbors who'd finally found their collective voice. Henderson stood first. Before you say another word, Constance, this community wants answers. Where is our money? The question hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Constance, new attorney whispered frantically in her ear, but she waved him off with the arrogance that had gotten her into this mess. All HOA funds have been properly managed according to community needs, she said, consulting notes that shook in her hands. Any accounting irregularities are simple administrative oversights that will be resolved through proper channels. When Marcus Bennett stood up in the back, his briefcase clicking open with the sound of justice being served. Mrs. Peaton, would you like to explain $347,000 in community funds deposited into your private business accounts? Or perhaps discuss why your property sits on land that was legally designated as community green space? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Constance's face cycled through confusion, denial, and panic in real time. Those are privileged financial matters that have no bearing on. Nothing's privileged about federal wire fraud, Agent Bennett interrupted, standing with the authority that only comes with a government badge. Mrs. Peaton, you're not required to speak, but anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. The crowd gasped collectively. Someone in the back started recording on their phone, and within seconds, a dozen other cameras were capturing what was about to become the most watched HOA meeting in Ohio history. But Constance wasn't ready to surrender. 6 years of unchallenged power had convinced her she was untouchable, and desperation made her reckless. This is a conspiracy, she shouted, pointing at me with a shaking finger. Garrett Blackwood has manufactured this entire scandal because he can't accept legitimate community standards. I quote, "We protected property values, maintained neighborhood aesthetics, and ensured compliance with essential regulations." Johnson stood up, his face red with suppressed rage. "You stole our money to pay for fake tree reports. You forced 3 families to sell their homes." Henderson added, her voice shaking with emotion. You quote, "We've been living on stolen community land for 6 years," Martinez called out, his deputy's training evident in his clear, authoritative voice. The accusations came faster now. Neighbors standing one by one, too, share stories of harassment, financial abuse, and systematic intimidation. The room filled with the sound of justice finally finding its voice. And then Constance made the mistake that destroyed her completely. "You people don't understand what real leadership requires," she screamed, her composure finally shattering like glass against concrete. I quote, "We made hard decisions to protect this community's investment." If that meant removing problematic residents, restructuring financial arrangements, or strategically managing property usage, then I did what was necessary. The room went dead silent. Agent Bennett's pen moved across her notepad like she was taking dictation from a confession booth. "Are you admitting to financial fraud and property theft?" Marcus asked, his lawyer's instincts recognizing the moment when a case becomes unwinnable for the defense. Constance, quote, "S attorney grabbed her arm, whispering urgently, but she was beyond legal advice. Now, 6 years of absolute power had convinced her that admitting wrongdoing was the same as explaining leadership. I admit to doing whatever was required to maintain community standards, even when ungrateful residents couldn't appreciate the bigger picture. The crowd erupted in shouts of outrage, but Agent Bennett's voice cut through the chaos with federal authority. Constance Peaton. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit property theft, and bribery of a public official. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the sudden silence, like the final note of a symphony. Cameras flashed as federal agents led Constance toward the exit, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. But I wasn't finished. Standing at the podium where she'd terrorized neighbors. For years, I looked out at faces filled with hope for the first time in recent memory. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Our community just reclaimed $850,000 in stolen lakefront property, and we're going to use it to build something beautiful together. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous roar that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Justice had finally come to Millbrook Estates. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of what used to be Constance's stolen lakefront mansion, watching my grandchildren play in the sand where her illegal dock once stood. The federal judge had awarded me $1.4 million in damages, the largest HOA fraud judgment in Ohio history. But the real victory was what we'd built together as a community. The legal resolution came faster than anyone expected. Constance pleaded guilty to 14 federal charges, rather than face a trial that would have sent her to prison for 20 years. The plea agreement required full restitution of embezzled funds, forfeiture of her illegally occupied property, and community service teaching ethics classes to real estate professionals. Her husband, Richard, resigned from city council in disgrace, and they moved to Florida to escape the shame. But justice was just the beginning of our story. The reclaimed lakefront property became the heart of our community transformation. Where Constance's mansion once stood. We built the Sarah Blackwood Memorial Community Center, named after my late wife, who would have loved seeing neighbors come together around something positive. The center hosts everything from children's art classes to senior citizen bridge tournaments, funded entirely by the recovered embezzlement money. My destroyed Memorial Grove became something even more beautiful. The community voted to create the Millbrook Heritage Arboretum, where we planted 40 new trees representing every family in our neighborhood. Each tree carries a small plaque with the planting family's name and a message about growth, resilience, and community. Sarah, quote, S. Memorial Oak stands at the center, its brass nameplate reading, "In memory of love that grows stronger through seasons of storm." The ripple effects extended far beyond our neighborhood.